to Genesis chapter 39. Okay, Genesis chapter 39, and I want to go back to Joseph. Okay, so this was a couple weeks ago. We were talking about Joseph. Now, God called a guy by the name of who? He called a guy by the name of Abraham. And then from Abraham, he called his son. What was his name? Isaac. And then his next son was Jacob. And then from Jacob, his name was, there's 12 of them. But one of them, his name was Joseph. Now Joseph had a very interesting gift. And his gift was he was able to have dreams. And not just have dreams, but he was able to interpret dreams. Now, he's a teenager at this time, and he has two dreams. One of the dreams that he has was he is harvest, or sheaf, the Bible calls it. And what happens is they're all bowing down. These different ones are bowing down to one. And the interpretation is he's that one, and everyone else is his family. And he communicates that to his brothers. How do you think they're going to interpret that?
They didn't like it.
They didn't like it, right? Very egocentric, very narcissistic, very self-driven. And then he has another dream, and it's about a sun, a moon, and 11 different stars bowing down towards one star. And the interpretation, he is that one star, and everyone's going to bow down to who? Him. How do you think the brothers are going to take it? Very what? Narcissistic, very self-driven, very egocentric. They hated it. They hated it. There was so much anger inside of their hearts, right? So, what they decided to do, their own biological brothers, okay? Their own biological brothers, what they decided to do, they decided to kill him, but Reuben, the oldest brother, says, do not kill him, let's put him in a pit, okay? And Reuben's thought process was, I'm going to get this guy later on and save my brother Joseph. Now, what happened was there were a bunch of Ishmaelites, or there were a bunch walking by, and they sold their brother Joseph for money. This is the first act of sex or trafficking in the Bible, okay? And all of a sudden now Joseph is going to this place called Egypt, okay? This is chapter 37. Now, what we got from the text, what we got from the passage was what? The hiddenness of God. The hiddenness of God. Joseph is in a pit. Now, when I'm talking about the hiddenness of God, is at times, this is a theological term, the hiddenness of God, for when you are living life and it's as if God is not involved in your life. You always hear about people talking about the presence of God, the presence of God. In your presence, there's fullness of joy. You ever walk into people, you ever talk to pastors, you ever talk to Christians, and it's like they're all on cloud 9 with God every single time. Hey, why'd you eat that chocolate glazed donut? Because God told me. Why not the coconut? Because God said eat the chocolate. You know what I mean? And I'm like, how? It's like there's this connection, and sometimes you wonder, how come God doesn't do it to me? Right? Who here experiences that? Who here feels that way at times? This is what we call the hiddenness of God. Okay? Now, how do you get through that? We talked about God's silence is not his absence. God's silence is not his absence. That God may be silent in your life, but it does not mean he is absent in your life. A.W. Tozer gives the illustration of a daughter crying, a baby crying on its mother's lap, and the baby is screaming, crying for its mother. The reason why the baby is screaming, crying for its mother is because from the perception of the little girl, the little baby, it feels like the mother is far away. But us objectively looking at the scenario, looking at the scene, can see you're in your own mom's lap. You're with your mother. It's all about perception. And A.W. Tozer says the same thing. He says, sometimes, at all times, we are in the Father's arms, but at times from our perception because of our situation where we're at, like Joseph, who is in the pit, might, from his perception, conclude that God is absent. But his silence is not his absence. Second, we talked about God's sight is not our sight. We have our own plans, we have our own visions in life, but God has a plan, God has a sight for us too. And sometimes where we don't see life through the eyes of God, we just see it 100% from ours, we can conclude that God is not in our life. But the key, the heart of what this life is about, is aligning our sight, our plan with where God's is. Alignment. Are our wills, are our plans aligned with the will and the plan of God? Or are we viewing life distant, apart from it? Are we on our own journey? Or in other words, am I in God's journey or is God on my journey? Because the moment God's on my journey, I can't see God because I'm in control. And that leads to frustration, anxiety, all that stuff. And last we talked about sovereignty. Sovereignty is seen through time. Meaning, the sovereign hand of God is never seen when you're moving forward in life, but when you pause. When you take a pause and you take a look back, and you look at the last 10 years, you look at the last 20 years of your life, and you saw the handprint of God. You saw the very handprint of God. But when you were in the moment, you never saw it. But when you were out of it and you pause and you look back, who here can sympathize with me on that point? Right? You've seen the hand of God when you look back at the last 10 years of your life. You're like, man, thank you, God, for not answering that prayer. Thank you, God, that this never went through. Thank you, God. But in the moment, you felt like there was silence. You see? This is what we call the hiddenness of God. Now, we go to Genesis chapter 39. Now, Joseph. This is Joseph after he was sold to the Egyptians. Now look at Genesis chapter 39. Look at verse 1. Okay? It says this. Now Joseph had been, verse 1, Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had brought him from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. Verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of the Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in the sight and attended him. And he made him overseer of the house and put him in charge of all he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptians because of Joseph, for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was in all that he did in the house and in the field. Verse 6. So he left all he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. Stop right there. Stop right there. This is Joseph now. He's now in Potiphar's house. And not only is he in Potiphar's house, but the favor of God is upon his life. You see? The favor of God is upon Joseph's life. Now, think about this. There is something that we see in this theme of these verses right here, or in chapter 39, and that's the word integrity. Okay? The word integrity. What comes to your mind when you think of the word integrity? Someone smart? Okay.
Truly yourself.
Truly yourself. Honest. Honesty. What else?
Good character.
Good character. Okay. What you see is what you get.
Someone you can trust.
Someone you could trust. There you go, like Joseph. What was it?
Someone of their word.
Someone of their word. Okay. You see a lot of people like that in our society. Hey, I'll see you at this time. They don't come. Right? That's lack of integrity. Right? What happens, right? Especially when Christians do it. It's the worst. Now, I want you guys to picture this. Let's just say you're in a situation in your life, okay? All of us here. We're not doing well. You're not doing well financially. You're not doing well financially. And now you're at a restaurant, okay? You're at a restaurant and you have enough money just for this meal. When you're at this restaurant, there's a wallet there, okay? And in the wallet, you open it up and there's $3,000 cash, okay? But the person's name is also on it too. The person's identification, the person's driver's license, all that is there. Question: what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it in the situation?
Hopefully you'll turn it in.
This is you, okay? I'm talking about you, okay? Hopefully you'll turn it in, right?
Yeah.
What else?
Facebook ban,
Okay. So I'm getting the vibe that everyone's going to return it, right? Okay, that's not the case with every person, right? I've heard many stories of someone losing their wallet, it being returned, but cash was gone. It being returned, but something happened. You see, that's a lack of integrity. Okay, so integrity comes from the Latin word, and what it means is wholeness of person. Wholeness, meaning the person is not divided. The person that doesn't have integrity is divided. There's certain division within the person. But integrity means wholeness of person. Let's put it practically. Integrity is character lived out in private. Okay? Character lived out or tested in private. You ever experience those times where you're at Mendocino Farms? Who likes Mendocino Farms? Hands up. Okay, I'm the only one who likes Mendocino Farms. But you're at Mendocino Farms, and then what happens is... has anyone been to Mendocino Farms?
Yes.
Yes? At the point, it's a sandwich spot. They have one at the point. No?
Blue and white. Baby blue and white.
Okay, baby blue and white. Anyways. So what happens is sometimes you can buy a sandwich, right? And you can also empathize with me at this point. But you're at a restaurant and you buy a meal. Okay, you buy a meal, but you don't buy a drink, but you ask for the water cup. Oh, you see where I'm going, right? You ask for the water cup, and it's see-through. It's so small and it's see-through. Not those big ones, but it's a small see-through one. And you're supposed to get water, but the Sprite or the Mendocino... The reason why I bring the Mendocino Farms is because their sodas are like liquid candy. It's so good, okay? So I'm always tempted just to try a little bit of it, okay? But... what do we do sometimes? There's a temptation that instead of going for the water, we go for what? The soda. Does anyone do that? Come on. We're out. No? Am I the only one guilty of doing that? No? You just tried two gulps, right? Right?
I have to taste it.
Right? There you go. Now one time I was in this dilemma where I was at Panda Express. I was in Panda Express, and I'm like, let me just get a sip of Sprite, right? But the thing is this: if I get Coke, people can see, hey, that's a water cup. It's supposed to be see-through. But Coke, it's dark, right? So me being sneaky, I got the Sprite, right? Because if you get the Sprite, it looks like it's water because it's see-through, right? No? Sneaky. Right? A lack of integrity there, right? Or have you guys ever been in a situation where you're in a parking lot and you hit someone, right? You scratch their car, or someone hits you. The person of integrity will communicate to the person that they hit, hey, I hit your car. They'll write a note, they'll leave it on, but the person of no integrity will just leave, right? What do we call that on the road? It's called a hit and run, right? Lack of integrity. No character in private. You can get away with things. One time someone hit me and there was a note on mine. It was an old lady. She says, I'm so sorry. I hit your car. I didn't even notice it. I didn't even notice there was a scratch or anything like that. I hit your car, whatever it is. I remember. And then the manager of the store came to me and says, hey, no one does this in our society anymore. I'm like, yeah, this lady has character. This lady has what? Integrity. Integrity. See? Integrity. It's character lived out in private. Now, I want to look at the text continuing here. What does integrity look like through the life of Joseph? What does integrity look like through the life of Joseph? Okay? Now, first thing is this. What does integrity look like? It's living blamelessly before people. Okay? It's living blamelessly before people. Look at verse 6. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. This is Potiphar. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. Stop right there. Potiphar left Joseph in charge of everything. And the only thing the text says that Potiphar was concerned about was the food that he ate. What does it say? And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. Imagine having someone like that work inside of your house. Imagine having a friend like that where you have no concern, but all you're concerned about is food. That's the only thing that you care about. You know what that means? He believed that Joseph was a man of integrity. He trusted him. And towards Potiphar, Joseph was what? He was blameless. That's why he can entrust him with everything. Everything. All he was concerned about was the food that he ate. Now, it's very clear that God was working in the life of Joseph. Verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. Verse 3, the Lord was with him, and the Lord caused all that he did to succeed. Verse 5, and the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for what? Joseph's sake. It was very clear that the presence of God was upon Joseph's life. It was upon his life. And because of that, what? He was a blameless man. We are called to be blameless people as Christians, as people that are people of God, people that profess the name of Jesus Christ. We are called to be blameless, but be blameless before other people. Okay? Now, I want to read to you the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 2. He says this, talking about being blameless. What does it look like to be a person that walks in integrity? Blameless before people. You see? Philippians chapter 2 says this, do all things without grumbling and complaining. Do all things without grumbling and complaining. I used to work with a kid back in the day who was autistic, David, back in Toronto. And he would always complain every single time. Someone's phone's ringing, by the way. Yeah. Something to let you know. It's all good. David, and I remember every single time he would complain, I would always quote him this verse. And I says, David, what does Philippians chapter 2 say? Do everything without grumbling and complaining. Do everything without grumbling and complaining. And he's saying that while he's grumbling and complaining, which is funny. But it says this, do everything without grumbling and complaining. And it says that you may be what? Blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, whom you shine as children of light in the world. This is what Paul is saying. We should be blameless people. Blameless, spotless. Also, Peter says in 1 Peter 3:16, having a good conscience so that when you are slandered, those who revile you for your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. This is Peter and this is Paul, but the heart of it is being blameless before other people. And this context that they're speaking about is a non-believing world. Just like Joseph. Joseph was a follower of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he was blameless before an unbeliever Potiphar. You see that? We are called to do the exact same thing. Being people that are blameless before other people. You see? Question. How do we become blameless? How do you practically become blameless as far as before other people? And it happens when this happens. When your behavior, your conduct in life is matched up with your belief. And that equals to be blameless. Okay? So we all believe in something, right? We all have knowledge. But when that knowledge is when your knowledge is consistent with what? Your behavior. When your behavior is consistent with your belief, that brings up what? Being blameless. We all have a certain amount of knowledge of the Scripture, right? We all have a certain amount of knowledge of who God is. But when what you believe in is consistent with your actions, that person is blameless. You see? Some of us, we have a lot of knowledge of who God is. But what happens when your behavior is right over here? People can look at you and be like, well, you believe in all this, but your life doesn't match up to it. If you have this amount of knowledge of who God is, your belief, but your behavior is consistent with what you believe in, people can look at you and be like, that person is genuine. That person is a person that walks with what? Integrity. You're blameless, you see? You're blameless. Did you have a question?
Well, I was going to say that Galatians 5:16 talks the whole aspect of walking in the Spirit, and you will not satisfy the desires of the lower nature, and that the power to live a life of integrity is more than just us trying to live it in our own strength, but it's through the Holy Spirit that gives us the power to live that life of integrity as New Testament Christians.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before non-Christian, before unbelievers, when a non-believer, when they look at you, they look at your life, like, man, that person's blameless. They believe this stuff. I disagree with them as far as their belief, but their life Their life. They can't say anything. What does Peter say in 1 Peter 3:16? That they may be put to what? Shame. They may be put to what? Shame. You ever see SNL or some of these comedy networks where they mock Christians? Where they mock some... It's mainly in the context of what? Their lifestyle, their belief, right? Let me be 100% honest. When it comes to someone like President Trump, right? When it comes to President Trump, I always, whenever it comes to someone that doesn't believe or someone that disagrees with him, I always am very specific with people, and I say to myself, well, why don't you, I always ask questions. Why don't you agree with this person? What about it? And I'm looking for policies. I'm looking for a principle, like one thing that he wrote or something like that, as far as what changed America, what changed a policy. And there's not much whenever I engage with people as far as a conversation. But it'll always go to, I can't stand the way he talks. Oh, I can't stand his what? Behavior. You see what I'm saying? So I'm like, wait, so it's not anything that he wrote down as far as like a policy. It's what? It's behavior. It's you just don't like the way he interacts with people. You don't like his tone, right? Do you guys get what I'm saying?
Well, too, and you have the fake news out there because
of course, yeah.
Basically they take everything he says and twist it into a negative light, and a lot of people listen to a lot of these news stations that never say anything good about him. They take the best thing he's ever done and they twist it into something that's negative. And when you actually listen to him and what he says without the cover over him or the distortion, he says many, many things that are just absolutely fabulous as far as when you can actually hear him, without the distortion.
Right. But you guys see what my point, though,
yeah.
As far as like maybe tone, demeanor. Let's take another person in human history that believed in the same values. That was also Republican. That was always conservative. Let's take President Reagan, Ronald Reagan. Did a lot of people rip or like light him on fire as the way? Not as much. You see what I'm saying? It's because he was a person of class. You see what I'm saying? Or let's take MLK, Martin Luther King. He's also a Republican, also a conservative, but what I'm saying is like the way he lived his life, he was spotless. You see what I'm saying?
Martin Luther King?
Yeah.
He had some serious issues, but he said the right things.
Right.
But actually they investigated him illegally, and they came up with all sorts of stuff.
I'm familiar with the argumentation upon that, but anyways, the point is beliefs. Right. We all have beliefs, but when our behavior is consistent with it, other people, non-believers, will look at our life and be like, they can't say anything. You see what I'm saying? So SNL, back to SNL. If you look at SNL, they make fun of people that claim to have something, but their lives are inconsistent. I always say this, but imagine SNL did a parody, or they made fun of someone like Mother Teresa. Imagine they did something like that. No one would laugh. People would be like, this is not funny. Why? Because of her behavior, because she was blameless before society. You see what I'm saying?
She's
one of the few. And what? She lived it. You see what I'm saying? She lived it. So what I'm saying is, non-believers will look at someone that has this life, has this powerful life, and they're like, this person is blameless. It'd be like blasphemy, even in an unbelieving environment. You see what I'm saying? Remember in the book of Job, where God is having interaction with the enemy. He said, where were you going? Where were you? He says, going up and down, to and fro from around the world. And he asked him the question. He's like, have you not considered my servant Job? What does he say? Blameless. He is blameless and a man that fears the Lord. All of a sudden, he allowed the enemy to tempt Job. And the heart of what the enemy did, the heart of what Satan wanted to do, is he wanted to break his integrity. He wanted to break his integrity, his character in private. So what does he do? He removes his kids, he kills his kids, all his property is gone, and all he has is his wife. And you know what his wife says in chapter 2? She says, do you still hold fast to your what? Integrity. Do you still hold fast to your integrity? And she encouraged him. Curse God and die. Could you believe that? The person that's right beside you, your inner circle, curse God. That's the encouragement. Curse God and die. Don't walk with integrity. But Job was a man that what? He had his behavior consistent with his belief in who God was, and as a result, he was genuinely blameless. You see that? Blameless before other people. Second, what does integrity look like? Living intentionally before God. Let's continue with the text in verse 6. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Okay? Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in the house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. Now, then how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" You see that at the end of verse 9? This is Joseph saying, how then can I do this great wickedness and what? Sin against God. Hold up. He was blameless before people because the very heart of what Joseph did is he lived intentionally before God. Think about this right here. This is Genesis chapter 39. The act that's about to be or could be committed here is what? Adultery. Adultery. Sleeping with someone that's in a married relationship. He says, how could I do this great sin before God? But this is Genesis chapter 39. How does he know that this is a sin? How does he know this is a sin before God? Do not commit adultery. Think about it. This is Genesis 39. When was the commandment to commit adultery given? Exodus chapter 20. That's hundreds of years later. This is years and years later. How is it that Joseph has this knowledge that this is a sin before God? Think about it. Genesis chapter 4. Cain kills his brother Abel. That's murder. How do they know that? There's no law given. There was no law written on stone or on a wall to say, do this, don't do this. How did they know this was a sin? How did Joseph know that it was a sin to commit adultery? The thing was this. He walked intentionally with God. You see, the law of God in Exodus chapter 20, the Ten Commandments, it's a reflection of the very character of God. And it's within every single human being. Before it was ever given, it was always in the hearts of every single human being because people are created in the image of God. You see? What's that?
Well, I was going to say, back in the Garden of Eden, as Eve walked with God, I'm sure God instructed them. And, you see, I'm sure there's an education that happened where God had contact with these people. Even though you didn't have the Ten Commandments, God still had things that he taught them, and perhaps they were taught during this period.
Perhaps, right?
It's not just it comes out of their innermost being, but perhaps God actually worked with them in some of these respects, because they did sacrifices, they did all this stuff that were kind of a foretaste of what was going to be done in the law.
Right. So remember this. Psalm 37 verse 4 says what? Delight yourself in the Lord, and what? He will give you the desires of your heart. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. You delight in God. You are someone in the pursuit of God. You're someone that seeks after God, like Joseph. Right? 5 times it says in chapter 39, the Lord was with him, and the Lord was with him. And all of a sudden it says, He will give you the desires of your heart. So if someone seeks God, they're in intentionality seeking God, all of a sudden what? It comes into their heart as far as what to do and what not to do. The desires of God become within a person when they what? Intentionally seek after God. When I became a Christian, when I became a believer, I remember anger, bitterness just destroyed my heart. All of a sudden I became saved, and I didn't know it was written in the law of God, but I knew it was not right. I didn't know about the forgiveness passage of what Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew. I didn't know if Paul says in Ephesians 4 about, laying aside anger and laying aside bitterness. I had no clue. But I just knew this was not of God until I sought after the Lord. You see? You see? Intentionally living after God. Okay? What does it look like? Intentionally. there's a monk by the name of Brother Lawrence, who's a monk in Paris, and he says, this is what you call practicing the presence of God. You see, practicing the presence of God. It's like removing all form of distraction and solely focusing intentionally on who God is. Me, Rich, and Jack, we went to this monastery. Has anyone been to a monastery before? No? You've been to? Yeah. We're at a monastery in Seattle, in some island, Fashion Island, or I forget what its island's called. Yeah. And then, what's it called? Vashon. I thought of Fashion Island in Newport Beach. That's why I said fashion. Vashon Island. And they brought us to this monastery, and there was these monks there. And then, I'm being super social and talking to people and everything like that. And they're taking me on a tour, and they're all about poverty, chastity, and humility or something like that. But it was like an environment where, what's that? Hospitality. But it was an environment where it's like you can solely focus on God with no form of distraction. I'm talking about where do you get your eggs? So I go to Ralph's or I go to Whole Foods. Where do you get your eggs? The chickens are right over there. It was one of those environments. And they try to convert me to being a monk, to being an Orthodox monk. I'm not even joking. I have a father, I forgot his name, his number, but he sat with me, and everyone was waiting outside because they wanted to go. And I was sitting there with his father, and they were trying to convert me. They were trying to convert me. And my one theological, robust, philosophical response was to them? I can't grow a beard. Sorry. That was it. Right? But I got a picture of all of them. It's hilarious. It's just me staying with all these guys, and they're all beards except for me. But think of that environment when you practice the presence of God. Proverbs 11 verse 3 says, the integrity of the upright guides them. You see? When someone is in that state of heart, state of mind, all of a sudden what? Integrity happens. That's the motivation of what integrity is, right? When you're practicing, what Brother Lawrence says, you're practicing the presence of God. Right? You're in a conscious, you're in awareness as far as God. Remember, integrity is what? Character lived out in what? Private. In private, where no physical human being is around you, but God, you know that God is always there. Right? Joseph knew that. Joseph knew it. How could I create the sin against who? Against God. So, what does integrity look like? You're living blamelessly before people. You're living intentionally before God. And this is where it's tested. 3, living in composure before false accusation. Okay? Every single human being will have their integrity tested. Like Job, like Joseph. Integrity will be tested. Look at verse 11, okay? Living in composure against false accusation. Verse 11, but one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, what? Lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Stop right there. This is what Paul says, what? Flee from sexual immorality. Whenever I think of this text right here, lie with me, but he left his garment in her hand, and what did he do? He fled, and he got out of the house. I always think of the illustration I always think of is, the Warner Brothers old skit, Coyote and Roadrunner? Remember that? All right. Right? The coyote, it's like when I was a kid, you always see the coyote, every single thought, every single time he thought the Roadrunner, it was evil. It was just he wanted to destroy his life. He had an anvil, he had a shotgun, he had a bomb, he had whatever it was. He just wanted to kill. That's a whole thing. But the Roadrunner, he's just so innocent, right? He's just so innocent. He has no clue that something's behind him. He has no clue that there's a bomb about to blow. He has no clue there's an anvil above his head. And what does he do? He looks around, and says what? Beep, beep, and runs away, right? Runs away. And he flees from what? Evil. Potential danger, potential life-threatening danger. What did Joseph do? He left his garment in his hand and what? Fled and got out of the house. He said what? Beep, beep, and he got out of the house, right? Continue. Verse 13, and as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her house and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her house and said to them, see, he had brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. Is she telling the truth? She's lying. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out a loud voice. And as soon as he had heard that I had left up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Verse 16. Then she laid up on his garment by her until the master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left in his garment beside me and fled out of the house. Stop right there, verse 18. Stop right there. What happened in reality? What happened in reality? She tried to sleep with Joseph. She was very aggressive. She was like the coyote. Every single time, she was always plotting evil. Do you remember from Thursday's Bible study? We talked about what? The forbidden woman. The adulterous woman. And she lurks around the street corners looking for someone. And it's the what? The man, the boy, the with no understanding. Right? She lurks around just like coyote, looking. That's the reality. What did she communicate to everyone in the household? Joseph tried to sleep with me. You brought this Hebrew into my house and he tried to rape me. That's a lie. Joseph did what was right, but he was accused of doing something that was what? Wrong. He did the right thing. He fled. He ran away. He fled from sexual immorality. But he was accused of doing the opposite. He was accused of what? Of rape. Now, what is at stake here for Joseph? What's the temptation for Joseph to do? You know what the temptation for Joseph to do? Is to defend himself. Defend his what? His reputation. Remember, he has a good reputation before Potiphar. He's in charge of everything. And now all of a sudden his reputation is being destroyed because of a lie. You see that? His reputation is at stake. So the temptation for him to do is what? Defend himself. Right? Nowadays, it's easy. Back in the day, it was hard to defend yourself. Today, we just write a tweet. We put a Facebook post or something like that, or a little video on Instagram, and it's easy. I didn't do this. We send it out, right? That's how we defend ourselves. But there's a temptation to what? Defend your reputation. Two common ways where integrity is always put to the test. This right here. Number one, your reputation is at stake. Someone is trying to destroy your reputation, gossip, slander, etc. Right? People are all of a sudden have a different view of you, of what they thought you were. And second, you know what a number one way integrity can be tested? Money. Right? Money. Just like the illustration we had earlier today, earlier. You're at a restaurant, and all of a sudden you see a wallet with thousands of dollars. Question, what do you do? What do you do? You see? Remember Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5? Where they sold property and all this money, and they gave just a portion. But what did they communicate to Peter? Oh, we gave all of it. We gave all of it. That wasn't the truth, right? Because money destroyed their integrity. You see? And what happened? They died right on the spot. How do you test? Where is integrity put to the test? Where your reputation is at stake. And number two, what? Money. But here, the temptation for Joseph is not money. Here, the temptation is what? His reputation. What do you do if you're in a situation where you're doing right? You're walking right before God. Before, people thought you were blameless. In your heart, you're intentionally walking with God. You're doing the right things. But all of a sudden, someone, just from a thought, just from a little anger, starts to spread slander, starts to spread gossip about you. What's the temptation for you to do? Defend ourselves, right? We could take it so personal. We were so agitated. Has anyone been in a situation like that? Where you were walking right with God, you knew you were doing the right thing, but all of a sudden, someone spread a lie about you. And all of a sudden, you got so furious, so agitated, and you want to defend yourself towards that person. Right? Is that in any of us? All of a sudden, there's a temptation to defend. Back in the day, I was a youth pastor, and I took 3 of the youth to Niagara Falls, because that's what you do in Toronto, right? You go to Niagara Falls. It's only an hour away from where we live. And we just had a good time. Just had ice cream, had dinner, whatever it is. And then there were three guys, and they were like 17. There's a difference between, I was 22 and they're 17. There's a difference between you're 32 and someone's 27 versus you're 22 and you're 17. So you're under the age, right? So now you're a little more responsible. And I come back and I'm hearing gossip from certain parents be like, did you know Ruben? Pastor Ruben? He went out with some of the youth and they were doing some stuff. That's the way it was communicated. They were doing some stuff. That's all I heard. So where does my mind go? My mind goes to stuff that's not good, right? Remember, the previous pastor before me, he did negative sexual stuff with some of the youth before. So I'm thinking, are they putting me in that same, are they trying to accuse me of doing something? We just had ice cream and dinner or whatever it is. There's nothing wrong, right? So I come back to the church and boy, am I defensive. I went to the same people who I heard it from and I came right up to them after the service. I'm like, hey, what did you say about me? Straight up, what did you say about me? And then they're like, you know what I mean? It's like people are so confident behind your back, but when you're face to face, people are all scared. I'm like, what did you say about me? And I'm like getting to the facts of it. I'm like, I didn't do that. Why are you spreading gossip about me? Just straight up. But my demeanor was so like defensive. You know what I learned throughout time? If I know I'm right before God, if I'm walking right before God, I don't need to defend myself. Fine. If you want to view me in another way or whatever, I can throw, hey, I didn't do it. Fine, that's it. But to go further as far as being all pushy and right in front of people's faces, why? You see what I'm saying? Remember this, living in composure before false accusation. Composure is you're good. You're at peace. You're okay. In the midst of what? False accusation. You see, you're being accused wrongly. Your reputation is at stake, but what? You're just okay because you know it's not right. You see? You guys remember that Beverly Hills bank robber that I was involved in? Where the cops thought I was a bank robber and they shot the guy right in front of me and whatever it is. But before they were interviewing me, there's cops and they had guns and everything like that. And my hands are all cuffed up and people have their cameras out. But I knew in my heart, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't rob a bank, guys. I was trying to tell them. But in my heart, I was good. You know why? Because I didn't do it. But there's a calmness. You're in composure. You see what I'm saying? In the midst of false accusation, right? You're okay. Think of this. Think of King David. King David. Told when he was 17 years old to what? You are going to be the king of the nation of Israel. The king before him, King Saul, was evil. And he hated David. And what did he do to David? He spread slander. Spreaded lies. All about this man David. But David, you can tell when we went through the book of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, he's not living to defend himself. Remember, integrity is what? Character lived out where? Private. 2 times he could have took this guy's life out, King Saul, the man that's spreading slander. The source of the evil, the source of slander from David's life. 2 times he could have done something. In private, he could have killed him. The first time, remember Abishai said, hey, let's kill this guy. But David was like, no, this is the Lord's anointed right here. At this point, at this time, God has him as the king of the nation of Israel, not me. At this time. So let's not touch him. David could have killed him. No one could have known. No one. But he didn't. Why? Because integrity is character lived out where? In private. Right? We could be people of integrity as far as, or we could be people of character in public because it's so easy. But when you're in private, you see what I'm saying? That's where integrity shines. And last, living, and this is the hard part right here. This is integrity tested to a different level. Last is living with forgiveness before what? Injustice. Living with forgiveness in the midst of injustice. Okay? Look at verse 19. Look at verse 19. As soon as his master heard, as soon as his master heard that the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisons were confined. And he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of the prisoners who were in prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made him succeed. Now, before, Joseph's reputation was at stake, but now it's not just his reputation, but it's his well-being. It's his well-being. This is where your life is at stake. This is where you're in a situation where all of a sudden your life is on the line. You might be put to death. This is where you're in prison for a certain amount of years, even though you didn't do anything. This is where you lose a significant amount of money, where your business is at stake. All because of what? False accusation. But what do you do in the midst of it? It's forgiveness. Living integrity. This is like the ultimate stage of how you know someone lives a life of integrity. Is they're forgiving in the midst of injustice. Okay? Not just reputation, but when their life is at stake. Think of Joseph. It's not his reputation. Now he's in prison. For how long? He has no clue how long he's in prison. But his life is at stake. His very well-being is at stake.
Probably over 10 years. Because he was 30 when they brought him out, and there was 2 years where the time that the baker and the guy that other guy was killed, the baker and the cupbearer.
Cupbearer, yeah.
So he was in jail an awful long time.
Right.
It could have been longer than 10 years.
Yeah. Well, we know he was in jail for 3 years. Joseph was in jail, but he has no clue at the time. Okay. So the thing is this: think of situations where someone does what is right, but all of a sudden they're not. The reputation is destroyed, but forget the reputation. Now their well-being is at stake. This is where integrity is really put to the test. You ever hear that situation in Oregon? I don't know if it was in Portland, but I know it was in Oregon, where they made cakes for a living, and there was a same-sex couple that asked them to make a cake, but they refused to do so. They did the right thing, right? Because this is what they believed. But all of a sudden they were fined for so much money. Their business was completely taken away. For what? For doing something that was of integrity. You see? Their well-being is at stake. You ever hear, there was that story, it's on Netflix. I think it's called The Long Shot. There was what's the actor, the comedian's name? David Larry or something like that? Larry David? You guys know Larry David?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so there's a situation that happened where there was a man, a 24-year-old Mexican man, murdered, or it was accused of murdering a 16-year-old. Has anyone seen this before? No? Well, I'm sure we've heard of stories on Netflix where someone didn't murder someone, but they were put in jail for a significant amount of time, right? And the question is, how did they deal with it? You see, but there was a man that was accused of murdering a 16-year-old, and he was a 24-year-old man, and he was accused of murder. And what happened was the police said they were going to put him to death. But he was like, I didn't do it. He had no clue what was going on. He didn't do it. And all of a sudden, Larry David, who's a comedian, had a show going on, and he was at the Dodgers game. And this man that was accused of murdering was at this Dodgers game with his daughter. And he was seen in that one specific spot. He was seen in that comedy. Like he was there with his daughter, and he was seen on camera when the murder happened. So just because of that, they never put him to death. Just because of that, but saved his life. Think of that, just from one comedy, one like funny documentary or whatever it is. Crazy. But seeing this man's face, being like, I didn't do it. I was with my daughter. See that? But you're being accused of something that you didn't do, even though you were doing what is right. The thing is this. This is where integrity is put to the test. Not just false accusation. Forget your reputation. Your life is on the line. You might be in jail for who knows how long. You might be put to death. You might lose a significant amount of money. You can't eat. Now your life is on the line. But you know you're doing what is right. The thing is this. Remember I say, living with forgiveness in the midst of injustice. Sometimes we cannot change the circumstance. We cannot change if we're going to go to jail or not. But what we can change is the attitude of our heart. What we can do is change the attitude of our heart. And that's living to forgive people who put injustice upon us. I'm talking to my buddy on the phone who's in jail. He calls me every single week. And remember, he's comparing himself to someone else that did the crime very similar to his. This Pizzagate shop, this Pizzagate in Washington, D.C. He's like, in 2016, this guy came with an AR and was firing it in the sky. And all of a sudden, my friend, who never came with a gun, is in the same, is going to be put in jail for the same amount of time. And he's saying, I don't get that. You see? So, to him, it's injustice. To me, when I see the story, I'm like, my buddy is wrong as far as what he did. It's wrong. But should he be put in jail for that amount of time? I don't know. But I have no control over it. We can send letters out. We can go in front of a judge and plead. But the thing is this. Whatever time they give him, they give him. But the thing is this. What I tell him, what you have what you have full responsibility over is the forgiveness, is the attitude of your heart while you're in jail. You can't control the circumstances around you, but you have full control of your heart. And what God calls us to do is be forgiving people in the midst of injustice. And this is where integrity is completely tested. Joseph in prison. When I read it, it doesn't seem like he was a bitter guy. Think of all the thought process that could have been in his mind. He could be upset with Potiphar's wife, with Potiphar, with his brothers. Remember, later on, chapter 50, what does he say to his brothers? When they think he's about to kill him, he says, no, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for what? Good. It's forgiveness in the midst of what? Injustice. You see that? Integrity. It's character lived out in private, in our private lives. What does it look like? You live blameless before people. You live intentionally before God. You live what? In composure in the midst of false accusation. And last, what? You live in forgiveness in the midst of injustice. Okay? Now, you can put it on silent too. Yeah. It's all good. Who is the person that lived with complete integrity that we could look up to most in life? Joseph, definitely. Daniel, another guy. What was it?
Jesus.
Talk to me about Jesus. I've never heard of that word before. Right? Jesus. Think about this. Think of all the things that we talked about. Jesus. He was a man that lived with integrity. It's okay. Just you can turn on silence, Elaine. All right. Think about this. Did Jesus live blamelessly before people? Of course he did. He was born blameless. He was born perfect. And no one could look, everyone that looked at his life, they saw him as a blameless person. They crucified him not because of his life or because of his truthful words, but he was blameless before people. Did Jesus live intentionally before God? Absolutely. He lived intentionally before his Father. You know what he says in John 4? My food is to do the will of him who sent me. My food is to do the will of him. Just think about that. Think of that level of intentionality. Okay? Third, he lived under composure before false accusation. Remember Matthew 4 when the enemy tried to tempt him? The enemy was trying to get after what? He was trying to break his integrity. He was trying to break his integrity when he's by himself. People looked at Jesus and they falsely accused him. They called him inspired by the devil. They called him a blasphemer, the Jews, his own people. His own biological family, his brothers, they never even believed in him while he was on earth. He was falsely accused before people. But he didn't fight back. He kept his composure. And last, he lived in forgiveness towards injustice. Did Jesus experience injustice in his lifetime?
Yes.
On the what? The cross. When Jesus died on the cross, it was injustice before people. But he had forgiveness in his heart. You know Pontius Pilate looked at Jesus. You know what he says to him, Jesus? I find no fault in this man. I find no fault. He's blameless. He's a man that's whole. There's no form of division inside of his heart. And all of a sudden, he's experiencing this form of injustice. And you know what he's saying on the cross? Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. You see that? He was the standard of forgiveness. He was the standard of integrity. And Jesus, he died on the cross and buried and was resurrected from the dead. So what? So we could have life. And not just have life, but we can be people that walk with what? Integrity here on this earth too. The question is, do we walk with integrity here on this planet? As we're living this life, we're people of character. We're called to be people of character. Whenever we're here, when we open up the scripture, you know why we do it? Is that we get God. We get more of God. We understand who God is. But not just in public, but most importantly in private, because that's how we truly are. Amen?
Amen.
Let's all stand up right now. We do not have our offering plate.